They called it a mining town scam, where promoters sold land plots shown on detailed maps, and buyers paid upfront believing entire towns were about to be built around valuable mineral discoveries. Printed maps displayed streets, plots, and mining zones, and agents explained how early buyers would secure land before rapid development increased its value. Investors purchased plotted sections of these towns, expecting roads, buildings, and mining activity to transform empty land into thriving settlements. Certificates described exact locations tied to mapped grids, and buyers relied on these documents as proof of future ownership and growth. Money moved through direct payments, and receipts were issued confirming rights to specific plots within towns that existed only on paper. Similar patterns had appeared during the 1920s land boom, where mapped developments attracted buyers long before the land matched the promises being sold. Promoters expanded sales by releasing updated maps, adding more plots, and extending town layouts without confirming whether any physical development existed. Buyers made decisions based on visual plans, trusting that mapped streets and mining zones represented real planned construction. Some investors committed savings or relocated based on expectations that these towns would soon become operational mining hubs. Requests to visit or verify locations were delayed, and agents assured buyers that development was scheduled but not yet accessible. What appeared to be early access to valuable land was actually a system where maps defined ownership, but the towns themselves were never real. In the early 20th century, similar patterns appeared during the Florida land boom, where mapped developments were sold as future towns and thousands of buyers invested before construction ever materialized. Across expanding mining regions, land value was often tied to speculation, and buyers relied on maps, surveys, and promotional materials rather than direct inspection of the land. Mining prospects created urgency, and promoters framed undeveloped areas as future industrial hubs, expected to grow rapidly once extraction began. Town layouts were designed on paper, showing streets, plots, and mining zones, giving buyers a clear visual structure of what was being sold. Investors trusted these maps as representations of real development plans, and ownership was often tied to grid references rather than physical landmarks. Land purchases were made through documents describing plot positions within these planned towns, and buyers treated these descriptions as equivalent to owning real property. Communication limitations meant most buyers could not easily verify locations, and decisions were based on printed materials and agent explanations. Promoters understood that visual plans carried authority, and detailed maps reduced skepticism by presenting organized and structured layouts. Local offices recorded transactions, and buyers received certificates confirming their rights to specific plots within the mapped towns. The assumption was that mapped towns would eventually be built, and early buyers believed they were securing positions before large-scale development. This environment allowed ownership to be defined by representation rather than reality, where maps substituted for physical verification. That reliance on mapped planning created the exact conditions where mining town scams could sell entire settlements that existed only on paper. Promoters introduced the mining town scam by offering plotted land within newly designed towns, and buyers paid upfront to secure positions before mining activity supposedly increased land value. Detailed maps were presented showing streets, residential blocks, and mining zones, and agents explained how each plot would gain value once operations began. Similar patterns appeared in early California developments around the Salton Sea, where planned settlements attracted buyers before infrastructure was actually built. Each plot was assigned a grid reference, and buyers received documents linking their purchase to a specific location within the mapped town layout. Money was collected directly through agents or local offices, and receipts confirmed ownership claims tied to these mapped coordinates. Promoters emphasized limited availability, suggesting that early buyers would benefit most once roads, buildings, and mining facilities were completed. Investors responded by purchasing multiple plots, expecting resale opportunities as demand increased with the town's growth. Decisions followed these expectations, with buyers committing savings, planning relocation, and preparing businesses based on towns that only existed on paper. The opportunity relied on visual certainty, where maps created confidence even though no physical development had taken place. Promoters expanded sales by introducing additional mapped sections, increasing available plots without confirming actual land readiness. The more plots sold, the more money entered the system, while the physical reality of the towns remained unchanged. This gap between mapped expansion and real development created the opportunity that allowed the mining town scam to grow. The mining town scam operated by converting maps into sellable assets, where each plotted section was treated as a real property even though no physical development existed on the ground. Promoters created detailed town layouts showing streets, blocks, and mining zones, and each section was assigned a grid reference that could be sold as an individual plot. Buyers received printed certificates linking their purchase to specific coordinates on the map, and these documents were presented as proof of ownership within the planned town. Money moved through direct payments collected by agents and offices, and receipts confirmed that buyers had secured rights to defined portions of the mapped settlement. The same mapped areas were reused across multiple sales cycles, allowing identical plots to be sold to different buyers without immediate detection. Maps were updated and expanded to include additional streets and zones, increasing the number of plots available without corresponding changes to physical land. The system relied on separation between representation and reality, where buyers trusted the map while no verification occurred on site. Decisions followed these representations, with investors planning relocation, resale, or business activity based entirely on mapped infrastructure. Because the towns did not physically exist, there were no boundaries, markers, or development to confirm ownership claims on the ground. Internal records tracked sales based on map references, but these records did not align with any legally established land registry. As more plots were sold, the gap between documented ownership and physical reality widened across multiple buyers. This mechanism allowed the mining town scam to process money efficiently while distributing ownership claims that had no real-world foundation. As early buyers reported expected progress, promoters expanded the mining town scam by releasing updated maps that showed larger layouts with additional streets, plots, and mining zones. Agents moved into new regions and presented these expanded maps as evidence of rapid development, encouraging new buyers to enter before prices increased. The same mapped areas were extended outward, creating the impression that the town was growing, even though no physical construction had begun. Money continued flowing through repeated sales, and new buyers relied on the apparent scale of the maps rather than verifying the land itself. Decisions escalated as some investors committed larger funds, purchased multiple plots, and prepared for relocation based on projected town growth. Local discussions began referencing these towns as upcoming economic centers, influencing expectations around trade, employment, and infrastructure. Promoters introduced premium sections within the maps, offering plots near supposed mining zones or central streets at higher prices. Internal records tracked increasing sales volume, but these records remained disconnected from any physical development or verified land registry. As more plots were sold, overlapping ownership claims became more likely, though this remained hidden due to the lack of immediate verification. Buyers who attempted to locate their plots were redirected with explanations that development phases had not yet reached those sections. The visual expansion of the maps maintained confidence, even as the underlying reality remained unchanged. This phase allowed the mining town scam to scale rapidly, increasing financial inflow while the towns themselves still did not exist. As buyers attempted to locate their plots, inconsistencies began to appear, and mapped streets could not be matched to any physical layout on the ground. Some investors traveled to the supposed locations, only to find undeveloped land with no markers, boundaries, or evidence of planned construction. Conflicts emerged when multiple buyers compared certificates and discovered identical grid references assigned to different owners. Requests for official land registration revealed missing or incomplete records, and the plotted towns did not exist within recognized registries. Agents responded with delays, explaining that development phases or surveying work were still pending before physical confirmation could be provided. Refund requests increased as buyers questioned the validity of their ownership, but payments were deferred without clear resolution. Local authorities began receiving inquiries about the towns, and investigations found no permits, infrastructure plans, or approved developments matching the maps. Similar patterns had appeared in earlier land speculation cycles, where mapped promises exceeded real development, exposing gaps only when buyers attempted verification. Internal records could not reconcile the number of plots sold with the available land, revealing overlapping claims across multiple buyers. Communication from promoters became limited, and updates shifted from specific timelines to vague assurances about future progress. The absence of physical development became increasingly difficult to ignore, as no visible change occurred despite ongoing sales activity. These warning signs exposed the growing disconnect between the mapped towns and the reality that no such settlements had ever been built. The mining town scam began to surface when groups of buyers traveled to the mapped locations and multiple investors arrived expecting to claim the same plots shown on their certificates. On-site verification attempts revealed open, undeveloped land with no roads, no markers, and no physical evidence matching the detailed town layouts printed on maps. Conflicting ownership claims escalated as buyers compared documents, and identical grid references were presented by different individuals claiming the same land. Requests were made to local land registries, and officials confirmed that no registered town plans, permits, or legally recorded subdivisions matched the mapped developments. Authorities began informal inquiries as complaints increased, and the absence of approved infrastructure or mining operations exposed the gap between sales claims and reality. Buyers attempted to trace payments and verify ownership through official channels, but documentation could not be linked to any recognized legal titles. Decisions began to reverse as investors abandoned relocation plans, canceled business expectations, and attempted to recover funds that could not be returned. The resale market collapsed immediately as plots tied to non-existent towns lost all perceived value once verification failed. Disputes emerged between buyers holding identical claims, and no resolution was possible because the underlying land structure had never been formally established. Promoters reduced communication and withdrew from operations, leaving transactions unresolved and records incomplete. Financial losses became evident as the system stopped accepting new payments, and existing claims could not be converted into real ownership. The mining town scam collapsed when verification replaced assumption, revealing that maps had defined ownership while the towns themselves had never existed. The mining town scam followed a repeatable pattern where visual representation replaced physical verification, and maps were treated as proof of ownership without confirming real development. Promoters separated payment from reality, allowing money to move immediately while the existence of the towns was never validated on the ground. Buyers relied on structured layouts, grid references, and printed documents, treating mapped certainty as equivalent to legal ownership. The system allowed expansion through duplication, where the same mapped plots could be sold multiple times without immediate detection. Intermediaries reinforced trust by recording transactions, giving the appearance of legitimacy without connecting claims to verified land registries. Delays in verification created a window where decisions were made based on expectation, and by the time checks occurred, the system had already scaled. The exposure phase showed that verification only happened when buyers attempted to physically claim their land or when authorities reviewed missing records. This pattern demonstrates how systems can be manipulated when representation is accepted as reality, especially in environments with limited oversight. Real-world outcomes followed the collapse, including financial losses, abandoned relocation plans, unresolved disputes, and loss of trust in future land investments. The same mechanism has appeared in multiple historical contexts, where mapped or documented assets were sold before they existed in physical or legal form. The critical failure was not just the fraud itself, but the system's reliance on assumption over verification at every stage of the process. The lesson remains consistent. When ownership is defined by what is shown rather than what can be verified, the system itself becomes the scam.